don't be afraid to smile either. You know, every now and then I make terrible grammatical errors, and it's all right if you've got Grammarly and you're writing a blog entry, but it's a bit difficult when you're at the supermarket checkout and you're getting your worms mixed up.
Hello and welcome to our latest Dementia adventure, Unpacking Dementia Facebook Live sessions. My name's Ruth. I am one of the project leads here and I lead on our dementia support services. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Peter Middleton today. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Peter, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, hi, everybody. Yeah, well, I'm Pete Middleton. I'm just over 6 years now into a diagnosis of young onset dementia. I've got Alzheimer's disease, you know, the common as muck one, that 70% of people diagnosed with dementia
That's the
have
one.
none of the exciting, exotic, rarer dementias for me. And luckily, my dementia currently doesn't affect my ability to communicate that much. I'm very lucky. So I'm very active in the world of dementia. I'm on the steering group of the Three Nations Dementia Working Group, the volunteer advisory panel of the Alzheimer's Society. I'm a member of the Northamptonshire Dementia Action Forum steering group. I participate in Time for Dementia. I volunteer as a guinea pig for clinical research. I also run a comedy workshop every Tuesday in Kettering. If anybody watching
Amazing.
is anywhere near there, come along. It's a drop in. And I do the odd clowning for recovery course too.
Wow. So
Uh,
busy schedule. So we're exceedingly lucky to have you join us today. And honestly, we absolutely appreciate your input because it's such an important subject. Now, before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please, those of you who've joined, feel free to leave any comments. And if you've got any questions, pop them in that chat function. Now, we will do our best to reply to all of them whilst we're on air. But if we don't get around to your question, we will come back to them after the session and respond accordingly. So, as always, just a shout out to Right at Home. They're our sponsors for sponsoring the Unpacking Dementia series. Really enjoying working with them. So, let's get started. So, in today's session, we are just going to be exploring the vital role communication plays in the lives of individuals living with dementia and their caregivers. We're so pleased to have you with us, Peter, and explore this because, like I said, it's absolutely huge. Now, as dementia progresses, it not only affects memory and cognitive functions, but it can impact the ability to communicate and connect. Now, understanding and really looking into that subject can mean that things can become quite challenging. So we're going to start really by thinking about how and why we communicate. So our input and receptive systems involves our ability to understand speech, signs, gestures, and body language of others, as well as our ability to read and understand symbols. So this can have a huge impact when dementia might start to affect that. And I know, Peter, you've wrote some absolutely beautiful blogs around this. They're a really interesting read, and I'm going to make sure that those are shared at the end of today's session. But there was something that struck me in one of those blogs that you'd put. I think the blog title was "The Feeling of Fading Away," and you said that dementia may change the way I interact with the world, but it doesn't erase my right to be heard. And I just wanted to start there. What is your experience that you're finding? What is your frustrations around this? Are you finding people are making decisions for you? How have you dealt with this since your diagnosis?
well, I find that stereotyping uh, gives rise to preconceptions.
Mm,
And when somebody's speaking to me, if they know of my diagnosis, they very often have a preconception of the way that they ought to communicate me without actually taking the time to find out the
right.
best way. And that's not just frustrating; it's downright annoying for
Yeah.
me because I still can, by and large, communicate effectively.
Yeah.
And there are other ways to communicate. You know, you just mentioned the non-verbal ways to communicate. And if you take the time to understand a person's dementia a little bit, you can improve that communication vastly.
Yeah.
And that makes a real big difference. We have the power of speech, us human beings, and that's what separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. And we're really lucky to have that
Mm,
advantage, but we
mm.
still very often don't use it to its
To its
full
full,
advantage.
yeah, I absolutely agree. I can see that Selena's popped in the comments that it's really better to have what seems like they might be difficult conversations as early as possible.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
then you've got that opportunity to really share your thoughts on those future decisions.
yeah. And I mean, if you waste those opportunities to have those conversations early, you're on a hide into nothing further
Mm,
down the line. Well, we were saying earlier, I wrote a blog about respite at the weekend, and the time to talk about respite is not when you're deep into troubles.
yeah,
Because yes, your respite will be worth its weight in gold then, but you've got a long way to push that ball back up the hill to the top again. So start to talk about it straight away, because it's part of your health and your well-being, an
yeah.
important part. That little bit of time for you, both the carer and the person with dementia benefits from respite, no end. Plan it in.
And do you think, would it be fair to say that sometimes people will talk sort of around you, not necessarily to you? I know in my experience when I've worked directly with people, like with caregivers and people living with dementia, and it's always or often done with the best intention that people talk about somebody or answer for somebody. Is that something you experience?
Yes, it's very annoying. I was when I engage in clinical research as well. They often ask me for a care partner. Now I still drive,
Mm.
so stay off the road today if you when this. But I still drive. I have my coping strategies. I always have my sat nav. I still find coping strategies to allow me to do most of the things I used to do, and I'm
Yeah,
constantly monitoring myself. So I can drive 40 miles to have a medical examination for some clinical research. Get there, and they'll say, "Sorry, we can't give you the medical examination because you haven't got your carer with you." Well, I have capacity.
yeah,
I don't want to be infantilized, and people have the tendency to infantilize people who are living with dementia because they just don't know any better. They don't know us well enough.
yeah,
I
yeah.
normally wear a badge. I don't wear it indoors, but it's got a little bumblebee on it. It's here, and it
Ah,
says,
okay. Oh, I
"Please
love
be
that.
patient. I have dementia." I wear it everywhere. Now it's not for everybody, but I want people to know that I've got dementia
Yeah,
because it will affect the way that they communicate with me. They tend to give me more time then. They're a little bit more patient. They let me finish my sentences. Hallelujah.
yeah,
Instead of
yeah. And
trying
I
to
think
pick
that's
words
key,
out
isn't
of the
it?
air for me that are inappropriate, and
Yeah,
make me have to start again from the beginning with my thought process. And when I'm at the checkout in the supermarket, when the things are rushing through at a great rate of knots, and I'm thinking, oh, I don't want to put the heavy stuff on top of the eggs. I want to put all the frozen food in one, so it takes me a little bit longer to process. People will give me the time to do that, and the people in the queue won't start sighing and tapping their feet and getting impatient with me. So there are things that I can do myself to
yeah.
aid that communication, and I think people living with dementia, it, it's a big step to wear a badge like that, because actually you're identifying yourself. But always think about that. I think try and aid that person who's trying to communicate with you as well, because they don't know. It takes training, doesn't it, to know how to ask open questions and how to be patient,
Yeah.
and how to interact with people who have speech difficulties and communication problems.
And do you know what? I absolutely love what you've just said there about you enabling people to communicate with you as well. Because I agree, it's an absolutely huge step to sort of label yourself, or, and it's often very, very difficult for people to work through that diagnosis process. And some people, obviously, later down the line might lack that insight that there is a problem at all. But your experience has been is that when people have that understanding, they will give you that bit of time that you need.
Yes, they will, and don't be afraid to smile either. Every now and then I make terrible grammatical errors, and it's all right if you've got Grammarly and you're writing a blog entry, but it's a bit difficult when you're at the supermarket checkout, and you're getting your worms mixed up.
Yeah.
Uh,
Is this something you call spoonerisms? Is this right? I did read one of your other blogs around this. Tell
uh,
me a little bit about this, because this really made me smile when I
I
was
noticed
reading
these
it.
strange anomalies in my speech, spoonerisms, which of course are when you're getting your words in a muddle. So you'll mix up the first letters of words
Right.
in a humorous way. And the Reverend Spooner was a very famous professor of, I think it was English or mathematics in Oxford University, and his students loved him because he did it all the time in the most
Right.
humorous ways. He used to just get things wrong, and in fact, there's an apocryphal story that one day he was seeing his wife off on the train, and he kissed the porter and gave his wife sixpence. He just used to get everything round the wrong way. And I've also noticed that I've started um, coming up with a lot of what are called malapropisms now.
Okay.
Anybody who's ever read Charles Dickens would have heard of Mrs. Malaprop. And if you've ever heard of a comedian called Hilda Baker,
Yeah.
then you'll know that she used to get her words totally mixed up, and I started doing it. And of course, when I look at my wife after I've done it, she's trying desperately not to laugh. And I wanted to really, because it is funny,
Yeah.
isn't it? Some of the
Yeah.
things we
And I think
do
a sense
are
of
funny.
humor is it's absolutely
So
key,
so
isn't it?
relax and
Absolutely
laugh,
key.
because why not? I
Yeah.
mean, the other day I was
Yeah.
looking for something. I think we got a new transistor radio or something, and I asked my wife if she's seen the resurrections for it. Silly little mistake, But when we looked at it
And
and
is it
go, "Oh,
something you recognise at the time? So if you've got that word mixed up, is that something you then recognise, or do you only start to recognise when you see the response from your wife?
in this split second of saying it, I recognise it, but it's too late, because
Right.
it's out of my mouth and gone. It's gone.
Yeah.
It's in the
And
public
I think it's
domain.
really key. It's absolutely key to acknowledge that, communication is so individual for each person. Certainly when I've looked into this in a lot more detail and the work that I've done, there is several areas of the brain that are affected, that can affect speech, how we produce speech, whether we can find the right word. Communication is so vast. And then before we joined today's session, I think we were saying we could spend all day on this subject and still not get everything covered, isn't it? So, what we're talking about today is really your perspective. But do you find, so if you're in a conversation with professionals or with a group of friends, do you find that keeping up with that conversation can be quite challenging? And if it is, what helps you? How can we support people to, have positive engagement?
Yeah, it can be very challenging. I know. I met some of you at a conference last week in London. A very noisy atmosphere at that conference. Really difficult to pick
Yeah,
one strand of conversation out of a crowd of conversations. And I think sometimes noise cancelling earplugs or headphones can help with that, if they're right. Also, if I'm in a conversation with somebody in a room, or even as we are today, if they've got a bright light behind them,
mm,
if they've got the window behind them, and all I can see is a silhouette, then that's when I realise that facial expressions and a little bit of lip reading are very important.
mm,
You don't even realise you're doing it, but it's aiding
no.
your conversation, your comprehension very much.
And I think,
So,
do you know what? For all of us, I think that's absolutely key. I mean, studies suggest that just 7% of our conversation is the words that we use, which is fascinating. And I've had conversations with family members said, how much do you think we rely on words? And, they're talking like 80, 90%. I'm like, no, it is 7%. But if you remember back when we were in the pandemic, we were all wearing masks, it was quite an unusual time. But our ability to read, whether somebody was, smiling at us, whether it was an open conversation, was all body language. It was, and tone of voice, I think, becomes really, really key, doesn't it?
yeah, my speech really, my ability to speak really went downhill during lockdown. I mean, my wife is a carer for adults with special needs, and so when she went into work, she stayed there
Yeah,
because of that. Uh, she didn't want to transmit any infection, so she was away for days on end. There was no Zoom at that time. Early on, I was on my own, not speaking to a soul.
yeah,
And but I was actually doing a video blog for a Channel 4 documentary, and there's a little bit. I think it's on my blog site. I don't know about. It was one morning when I realised that I couldn't speak properly. I
yeah.
just couldn't speak properly, and it affected me quite deeply. Actually, I was a little bit tearful, to tell you the truth, because I really thought I was going downhill fast. But for
Yeah.
me now, because I do public speaking and all that sort of thing, I'm convinced that that's what's keeping me, keeping my head above the water. And that,
Well, I think ultimately, when we're using speech, we're using our brain, we're looking for
yeah,
information,
yeah,
and the brain, it's true they say, isn't it? If you don't use it, you lose it. So keeping busy, keeping active, and I know you're incredibly busy. Pinning you down is, we are exceedingly lucky to have you here with us because of that. But actually, like you say, you notice that decline because when we don't have that social interaction, when we're not having that two-way communication, it's key, isn't it?
very much so. And I know, as your dementia progresses, many dementias make it more difficult for people to communicate because we're somewhere
Yeah.
else more of the time. And other dementias, of course, make people's communication sometimes a little bit fruity.
Yes, that's
Things
true.
like
Yeah.
Lewy bodies and what have you. But you've got to ignore that,
Yeah, and
and
sort
you've got to
through that.
look for the for the nugget of communication, and cut out the static. Sometimes I think that's a good tip for communication.
Yeah,
Um, Also, communication is something that once you start the ball rolling, you just get better and better at it. So what I enjoy doing at my dementia groups is we'll start with just a little bit of a chat about nostalgia. We'll find something in common and we'll
yeah,
discuss it. And people get quite excited about the things that they used to do at school and what have you. And all of a sudden, things will come flooding back and they'll come back for a little while.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
the time when you've got them, when they've come back for that little while, that's the
Then
time to
really
engage.
expand.
And it's
Absolutely. I
glorious.
mean, I think being totally honest and upfront, I know dementia could put a real strain on, caregivers,
Yeah,
ourselves,
yeah.
because often this happens over time. And it's often, it's those relationships, those dynamics that we're in, isn't it? We're supporting a partner or a parent, and they're not, sometimes our communication really needs to adapt to support that. I think one of the things I supported my grandfather who had a diagnosis, and I think I learn around communication. I tried to remember my ABCs, was what I called them, and it was really, I break it down to avoid arguing. There was very little benefit in kind of arguing the toss over little things, but yet it was so easy to go down that route because that natural relationship, and it was done with the best of intention. Um, but avoiding arguing for our A and being practical, was really, really key. So actually listen, I had to really step back and listen to what he was saying and then clarify that, and that actually just those ABCs towards that communication would avoid an awful lot of conflict when I look back now.
You're right. And the A out of the ABC, I think, is probably the most important thing of all.
Yeah,
Argument is frustrating for both parties because people aren't trying uh, to be contrary on purpose. Sometimes I'm explaining the world as I see it,
yeah,
but it may not be the same world that you see always because I tend to slip into the past more now.
right.
So the way I envisage my daughters is not always at the moment the same way that my wife does.
Yeah,
That's part of dementia. So we don't argue if I say that I'm doing something.
yeah.
And patience, I think. So maybe ABCP, patience is so
Yeah.
important. I,
I think, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
However many times I ask my wife, uh, are we going out tomorrow in one day? I don't know. But she'll never get impatient with me and say, I've just told you that. Because
Yeah,
she understands that I'm in the moment a little bit. And I
yeah.
don't realize that I'm in a loop. Sometimes I'll realize and I say, Pam, did I just say that? Sorry. And I feel a little bit embarrassed. But we've got this thing. We're very lucky that Pam never gets angry with me about that. She must
That's
be
lovely.
frustrated
Yeah.
inside.
And I think it's absolutely key, isn't it? Because I think one of the things I know from the role that I do, and I'm incredibly lucky to have that insight, is that when you've got that diagnosis of dementia, regardless of what dementia that is or how that's impacting, the brain's ability to adapt and have that insight can become compared. Whereas as a caregiver, I can change my approach. I learned quite quickly that it didn't matter. I would call my granddad every day and say, like, but don't you remember? Don't you remember? And then it actually dawned on me that memory's not there for him. That's maybe not where
No,
he is.
no.
And
And
then it was my approach of, do I need him to remember, that became really important. And actually, when I started to think about it a little bit differently, the changes, it was just little tweaks. It's not like a vast change, but those little tweaks of thinking, actually, in the bigger picture, do I need somebody to remember that small detail? or actually do we just move on so we can keep enjoying that communication?
Yeah, and we love you. We're not saying things like that. We're not being awkward when
Yeah.
we don't mesh with you and agree with you about everything. It's part of our condition.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
And I
so
think
it's
that's a
not important.
two-way feeling, isn't it? As caregivers, we absolutely love you back again, but it's those natural dynamics of a relationship that are changing and that can become so challenging.
Yeah, because it's it's a sign of a change that you don't want to see,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely must be.
So you've got to
Right.
think about what's left rather than what's gone as much as you can, haven't you? And
Yeah,
concentrate on what's left and enhance it as much as you can and give people things to do to stimulate them. That's why I do my comedy work. There's nothing like it. I can go to a care home where someone has been not been communicating for weeks, and we'll have little bit of fun with the staff, and all of a sudden they'll start laughing, singing, and talking. Can you imagine? That makes me cry when I see
yeah.
that their family can come and visit, and Doris is back again.
And do
Doris
you
is
know what? Funny
talking.
you say that. There's been a comment in the chat from Verity, and thank you, Verity, for sharing. She said that her husband's moved into a care home last year. She said that before he had moved, he started to engage less and less. But now we have some visits where he doesn't engage at all. Sometimes her daughter and I will just sit with him and look through the photo albums. But she said actually by looking through those, it relieves that agitation.
Yeah.
And it's again, it's still communication, isn't it? And I think we forget that. We feel that it should always be talking. And actually, in my experience, and Pete, by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, but actually spending time with somebody, just being there is still communication.
Oh, it's lovely, especially looking through those photo albums. You say, "Look there. Do you remember Uncle John?
Yeah,
Do you remember what he used to do at our Christmas parties and things like that? Little
yeah,
things like that
yeah.
will bring a smile, and there's nothing more beautiful than that, is there? Really? You
Yeah, I
know.
mean, the intergenerational work I've seen, and my kids used to find it hysterical that my granddad would show us photo albums, and other relatives would look like they did, or I did, or and making that connection and seeing his face light up used to really make me smile. And you've then got sort of 3, 4 generations of people all engaging, all sharing that experience, which is, I think, is something really, really special, really special. So we haven't got too much longer left of today's session, but what I'd really like to do, if you don't mind, Peter, is ask you if you could round up 3 of the best ways to support your communication, or 3 of the things that you think are the most important to help you engage and, be supported when you're out and about. What would those be? Is that a bit unfair?
Oh gosh, it's not so much a big ask, I guess. If you're a healthcare professional,
Yeah,
then ask me what the best way to communicate with me is. I can still tell you and communicate with me. Don't try and communicate through someone else. It may be that I might ask you perhaps to write something down
yeah, yeah,
or have it prepared. If you, for instance, if you're a healthcare professional, say you're a physiotherapist, it's no good giving me 20 things to do when I get home because I won't remember them.
yeah,
So it's a waste of your time. It's a waste of mine. Give me a little trifold brochure. Send me home with a list of chair aerobics to do for the next week, and my tail will be wagging because I want to do the best I can for
and
you
then you've got
and
that
for
time to
myself.
process it as well.
Yeah, it gives me time to process it. Or say, is your wife there? Is your carer there? Would they like to come in
Yeah,
and let's tell the carer because she remember she'll be your memory. So
yeah.
Pam will remember for me, and she'll jolly well do the chair aerobics with me as well. So we'll have a bit of fun doing
But I
that
think what
together.
I'm hearing from you is that actually you want to be communicated to. You don't want somebody communicating behind or around you. You want that direct communication.
Always, always. It's about dignity, isn't it, and self-respect, I
Yeah,
think. And
absolutely.
so that would be the first thing. I guess also patience. You've got to be patient
Yeah.
on both sides. I can get impatient sometimes when people don't understand how they ought to be speaking to me. But hey, they're doing their best too.
So what can then external companies, I don't know, energy companies, because you phone them up, you get 15,000 press this, press that. Now I'm sitting here with what I'd like to say is fairly okay cognitive ability. I find it a little bit overwhelming. What can companies do? Because for you living with dementia, that's got to be even harder.
Well, I'm also on the Santander steering group, so I've been helping Santander to make their business processes more dementia friendly. But the thing to do, of course, is to consult carers, consult people with lived experience, and also for me, with all of the major utility companies that I'm involved with, and anybody like that, I always make sure to ask them straight away, do you have a register of people with disability? If you do, please will you put my name on that so that people who call me are aware that I have dementia, and they may need to be a little bit more slow and a little bit more careful. Now, no names, no pack drill, but there's a certain company that deals mostly with people over 50 for
Right.
car insurance and holidays and what have you, and their staff are well trained,
Right.
and they will give me the time that I need. Other companies, of course, will do the same. Some
I
won't.
think that's really key to take though, because I wasn't aware there was registers like that for some companies, and actually that's really helpful for both
They
them and
almost
for
all have them now.
you.
And if they don't, ask them, jolly well ask them, why not? It's part of being a dementia activist, isn't it, eh? And it will benefit the whole dementia community. So get out there and don't be frightened to step up, because what you're doing, you're helping that company, aren't you? Because
Yeah,
there are nearly 1 million of us now with a dementia diagnosis, let alone carers and family. And
yeah.
most of us have an independent income. We're the purple pound. We've got power. So
You
we
have
ought to stand up there
100%.
and shout and make the world better for us. Because if it's better for us, it's better with for anybody with a hidden disability.
Absolutely agree. I couldn't agree more. Peter, it has been an absolute pleasure to spend this lunchtime with you. We have come to the end of today's session. We've been here for a good half an hour, and I could spend all day listening to you. Absolutely fascinating. I just want to say a quick thank you to all of you who've joined today. I am going to share Peter's blogs with you, because do give them a read. They're brilliant insight into, lots of different areas of living with a diagnosis. But you're a beautiful writer, Peter, and a beautiful communicator. For any of you who've popped comments in, if we haven't acknowledged them right now, I will go over those. Any questions we will pick up. But I think really it's just for me to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's incredibly valuable to hear for somebody living from, that perspective, living with a diagnosis. So, Peter, is there any final thoughts you would like to share before we wrap up today's session?
Yeah, yeah, okay. You can't tell a book by its cover. You just can't. So take the time, if you can, to get to know the person you'll want to communicate with just a little bit better. Those levels of communication will make all the difference and enable you to get more out of any conversation that you have.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's right for all of us, isn't it? Thank you so, so much. Really appreciate that. Take care. We'll see you again next month.